Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's virtual program with Turnstile Tours. I'm Andrew. Welcome to all of our regular viewers. And I do see a couple new people here. That's great. And today we're going to be exploring another route of the New York City Ferry. I'm going to be joined in just a couple of minutes by Stefan, who is on the boat. Luckily, it's a little bit warmer and nicer today than it has been the past couple of days. But he is going to be taking us from Lower Manhattan all the way up to the Bronx. So this is the furthest we've gone on the ferry, at least going north thus far in all of our ferry programs. So we're excited to share as much as we can. There's so much packed into this program and a lot of new stuff that we haven't talked about before, especially in the second half as we get into the northern reaches past Roosevelt Island. So we're really excited for this. I wanted to just show you the route that we're going to be traveling, because we're not only going sort of farther than we've gone before north, but we're also going to be visiting some new stops on the NYC Ferry. So here we can see, so we're going to start at Wall Street, and Stefan's he should just have gotten on the ferry, and we're going to check in with him in just a second. And then we're going to Stuyvesant Cove, which is only served by this route, as you can see on the map. And so we'll talk about some new things there. Then we'll head to East 34th Street, then East 90th Street, and then we're going to head all the way up through the Hellgate and then up to Soundview for our last stop. So we're going to be passing by a lot of islands of New York City, and we're also going to be talking a lot about, like I mentioned, resiliency is one of the themes we're going to be talking about. We're also going to be talking a lot about exclusion and how these islands were used and are still used today as a place of exclusion in various ways. So those are the themes that we're going to talk about. But I see Stefan is ready to go. Hey, Stefan, how's it going?
Hey, I'm on the water. It's going pretty well.
Nice. Yeah. So how's the weather this afternoon?
Yeah, it's lovely. Light breezes, cool but not cold. Yeah, couldn't really ask for a better day.
Yeah. So we're going to jet up now to about 23rd Street. And as Stuyvesant Cove is going to be our first stop, but maybe we can take a look at the shoreline that you're seeing.
Absolutely.
Another thing to mention about this tour today is that we're going to be hugging closer to the Manhattan shoreline than we have before. I think some things may change due to tides and currents, and the exact route of the ferry is subject to change because of that. So I'm pretty sure we're going to go up the Western Passage between Manhattan and Roosevelt Island, whereas on all our other programs we've gone up the Eastern Passage closer to Queens. So we will get a better look at some sites in Manhattan than we have on previous programs today. Yeah, so I'm going to spotlight your screen here, Stefan.
All right, so here we are coming into Corlears Hook, or coming around Corlears Hook, an area that's not particularly well served by transit. And one of the most fascinating neighborhoods in the city to me. This is the particular stretch of waterfront we're looking at was where the New York City's shipbuilding industry was located until shipbuilding changed from wood to steel. And then really Philadelphia kind of took the lion's share of American shipbuilding at that point. But this is where the highest quality clipper ships and the packet ships were all built. And it was a vibrant neighborhood full of hardworking folks. And then this is really, we think of today, looking back in the last century, we think of New York as a place that had seen a lot of industrial collapse. And this was really the first industrial neighborhood to collapse in the city, and kind of a space where we saw the latter half of the 20th century presaged as early as the 1890s. And there was a lot of the impetus for building the FDR Drive, which dominates our view of it today, was about they thought the FDR Drive would help revive this neighborhood, which had been hollowed out by the collapse of the shipbuilding industry.
And of course, the idea was to revive the neighborhood by separating it from the water rather than, really engaging it with the water, which is the strategy today.
And of course, separating us from the water is not the worst thing when we're dealing with rising sea level. So this is an area that is getting a lot of attention today. There was this report from the EDC released today, I think, that is suggesting plans for how we can address sea level rise. And there's some pretty radical ideas, including pulling down the FDR drive and extending the shoreline, which is pretty controversial in maritime circles, and also controversial the notion of closing this park that we're looking at here in order to raise the ground level to build a barrier between the residences and the businesses downtown and the rising sea.
Yeah, I want to share an image here to give folks a little bit of context on that, Stefan. Thanks for bringing that up. So, yeah, what came out recently was sort of a preliminary report about a final report that's supposed to come out before the end of the year. So just a few details were leaked of that, but it has to do with the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Plan, which is laid out in zones, as you can see here. So there's the Battery Park City Zone, then the Battery, and then this report was about the sector you see that's a dotted line right there, the Financial District and Seaport Climate Resilience Master Plan. I mean, one thing you can see about that zone is that unlike the other zones, it still has a shoreline of piers, which the other parts of, have that smooth shoreline, either because of the construction of Battery Park City or the construction of the FDR on the east side. So yeah, part of the details of this plan that were leaked were that it would extend the shoreline in some places up to 188 feet. Is that right?
Yes,
so that would
down from an earlier proposal.
Yeah,
So.
Which would essentially subsume most of these piers that you can see on this map here.
And as we've encountered historically over on the Hudson, we can't just extend the piers further out. There's a limit set by the Army Corps of Engineers to how far the piers can go out into the water. And we're basically at that limit with those piers. So that just means shortened piers, if anything, left.
Right. Yeah. Which would make it kind of hard to operate a ferry system. This is the hub. Yeah, and then Stefan also made reference to East River Park, which you can see in the top right corner of this map right here. That is sort of a separate plan outside of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Program specifically, but very much related. Also a city program, and that has been the most sort of controversial of them and met the most resistance because it would lead to closures of large sections of East River Park in order to build berms and other hard barriers for protecting that corner of Manhattan, the former, well, it still is called Corlear's Hook, but that was the heart of the industry that Stefan was speaking about. Yeah, I've always been curious, Stefan, because I'll be honest, I haven't spent a ton of time like walking around that neighborhood there, sort of the lower east side.
Yeah.
What is left of the as sort of, is there any sort of memorialization to what was there? All I can think of is that there's a street called Dock Street, and I think that might be it.
In terms of the shipbuilding industry, I'm not aware of any reference or remnant to it, which I would love to see change.
Yeah. Maybe put up a monument where the old bell used to be. And in the 1830s, the shipbuilders went on strike to fight for a shorter workday, and that's when they instituted basically an industry-wide standard for the shift start and end time. And so they installed a bell, and they paid a kid to ring the bell by basically passing a hat. So it'd be cool to have some kind of marker that was on that spot.
You were talking about piers. We're coming into the Stuyvesant Cove here, which is I connect this to piers because there really weren't that many piers over on this side of Corlear's Hook and coming into Stuyvesant Cove, everything we're looking at here, including the power plant, which famously got flooded in Sandy, this is a much shallower area, and
Mhm.
Stuyvesant Cove and all the buildings we're looking at, which I know you'll talk about in a moment, this is all landfill. This was a big salt marsh, and the lower end of the East River, back where we started, that was a deeper water port. The shore dropped off more precipitously, and over here you didn't have those piers because it was just a lot farther to get out to deep water.
Yeah, and you did have slightly deeper water, I'm guessing, over on the Brooklyn side,
That's correct.
which
That's
is where
correct.
the industry was concentrated. And I apologize a little bit that your picture is broken up just a little bit as we're coming in here. Yeah, so here we are at Stuyvesant Cove, and we are right in the shadow of Stuytown right here, Stuytown and Peter Cooper Village, which we've talked about on past programs, but a really significant development in New York City's housing history for both good and bad reasons. It was built, actually, they started building it during World War II with the intention for it to open in the wake of the war to provide housing for veterans. And the vast majority of the people who moved in there in the early days were World War II veterans, all of them white, because it was made to be a whites-only development. It was a private development made by the Metropolitan Life Company, but with a huge amount of city subsidy of acquiring the land and preparing the land and things like that. So this led to a great deal of contention and a big civil rights fight that lasted. Really, I mean, it struggled with integration, well into the 1960s and arguably beyond. Yeah, and then we're going to pass by in just a minute. If you could turn a little bit to the right, another important landmark of housing, which is Waterside, which was built in the 1970s, part of the Mitchell-Lama sort of middle income housing program. But there is a significant monument that's up there at Waterside, which has to do actually with the construction of the East River Drive or the FDR Drive. And that the construction of that was actually, obviously it was all done with landfill, but certain parts of it were a very special type of landfill. I'll show you an image here because there is a plaque to commemorate that. So here we can see a newspaper article from January 26, 1941. It says Briston, that should say Bristol. And it says bomb kills Cary Grant's kin. So Cary Grant's real name was actually Archibald Alec Leach. And so his aunt and uncle were actually killed during the Blitz, the bombing of Bristol. And so the area that is right underneath Waterside that we're going to pass by in just a minute is known as Bristol Basin, because large sections of the East River, what is now the FDR Drive, basically south of 23rd Street, were created using rubble that was collected from Bristol. So Bristol was a major port. And so ships that were going back and forth between the UK and New York, they would come back to the United States basically empty during the war. And so they would actually fill up the ships with construction debris and rubble from Bristol, and they chose to dump it here on this section of the East River. And so over time that was filled in and graded. And this was even before Pearl Harbor, before the US entry into World War II. And so in late 1941 is when they started construction here, and they graded that. And so as a monument to this fact, they put up a plaque, which has moved position a couple times, but in the Bristol Basin, which you can see right in front of us. So it was dedicated in June of 1942, and then after the construction of Waterside, when they relocated the plaque, that's when Cary Grant came and they took this picture in 1974. So if you walk down there, you can find it pretty close to the little marina that's there. Interesting little marina too, because it also happens to be an airport. So there's float planes that come in and out of there, going to Fire Island and the Hamptons, and I think they even have a flight to Boston. Thought about taking it, but didn't really think it was worth it to spend like over $1,000 to fly to Boston.
It's not the flight to Boston; it's the flying in and out of the East River. That's
yeah,
what you're paying for.
Yeah, exactly. So this, now we get a great view of Waterside right here. And the sort of marina is on the south side of it, and so that's where the float planes dock. If you've ever wondered, seeing float planes fly over the East River, we get great views of them, see them all the time from the Brooklyn Navy Yard. But that's where they're coming into, and the airport code for it is NYS, I think. So easy one to remember, and not the only airport that's on the East River. Of course, we also have the heliports, including one that we're going to pass by in just a second. And the one that's down on near Wall Street. Is one about to take off, Stefan?
We had one take off a moment ago, so I'm guessing we'll be a little while till the next one goes by.
Yeah, I've been on the NYC Ferry coming in here and had to make some evasive maneuvers because of rotor wash from the helicopters coming in and out of here.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. So usually it's extremely loud right here, but Zoom is doing a great job of blocking out. Really, we can't hear any sound, frankly, Stefan, other than your voice.
Well, that's that
and so we're about to pull in
its job.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is it pretty windy?
No, it's really very light breezes.
Yeah. And so here we can get a nice view of the elevated East River Drive, and part of that project that they will be releasing before the end of the year. The proposal would be to bury a large section of the FDR Drive. Is that right, Stefan?
I didn't get into that level of detail about it. I will say, for anybody who has been around New York for a while, that will bring up memories of the West Side project, the Westway project.
Right.
Their proposal back in the late 70s to bury the Miller Highway, which used to run down an elevated highway on the west side of Manhattan. And of course, that was going to also extend the pier line and build a New York big dig before Boston had its big dig, and bury a highway underneath, but eliminate all those piers. Of course, those piers have become a real resource for our parklands on the Hudson River side.
Yeah, and being a former resident of Seattle, you probably know all about dismantling elevated highways.
Yeah, I left before they started dismantling the highway, but I was in Boston for the big dig, and I was in Seattle when they started the very beginning of dismantling the highway, and when they had their big tunnel boring machine that got stuck in the tunnel. That was a real civic infrastructure moment to witness.
Yeah. Stefan, maybe you can turn to the left a little bit and we can take a peek at, one of the newer buildings of the Manhattan skyline. We can just see one of them because the angle we're looking at, but this copper colored building that sort of takes a little dog leg in it, which is called the American Copper Building. When we pull around, we'll get to see the two towers of it. But that is, one of the most sort of striking buildings that's on this section of the Manhattan waterfront, largely because of its sky bridge, which connects the two buildings. It's a 3-story sky bridge, which we'll see in a second, which also contains a lap pool inside of it. So unlike a lot of places along the waterfront that we're mostly going to focus on, we're going to take a look at some of the places like hospitals and homeless shelters this is definitely not that. This is a extremely high-end luxury building.
There's so many fascinating buildings visible from here, and
Yeah,
this large open space between us and the UN, which
yeah,
has been sort of controversially open for quite a while. Really kind of iconoclastic developer who's owned it and not done anything with it for quite a while. And behind it, you can see the brick buildings of Tudor City,
hmm,
the low brick buildings, and just peeking out very close to us, right over the FDR Drive. At the end of our ferry pier, you can just make out a little copper cupola from an old brewery that's down here
yeah.
near the water.
Could you turn to the left a little bit more, Stefan?
Yeah, sure.
You don't mind? I want to see if we can maybe a little more, a little more. Okay, we can't quite see it. Okay, it's just past NYU Hospital. But yeah, I mean, as we make our way up the river and go past Roosevelt Island, Randalls Island, Ward's Island, we're going to talk a lot about the use of the waterfront as a place of exclusion. And actually the largest homeless, we just passed by the 30th Street Men's Shelter, which is the largest homeless shelter in the United States with over 800 beds, which is attached to Bellevue. I know in a past program we had people ask, like, can you see Bellevue? And you actually can't see Bellevue Hospital from the water, but you can see this former ward of Bellevue that's now a homeless shelter.
And here we've got that sky bridge on view
Yep,
now.
yep. So again, city of contrasts.
And there's a great view of Tudor City. And so
Yep.
of course, before the UN got built, this was a very different looking space. You love the story about Tudor City and the small number of windows on it.
Yeah, and I'm going to show you a map which will illustrate why people did not want to look at the waterfront. If they lived in Tudor City, they would much rather have a view down towards Grand Central, and the skyscrapers of Manhattan because of what was there. Okay, so we're looking at basically 44th Street to 47th Street here. So basically where the UN is today, but you can see along the waterfront here, the lots that the UN actually sits on now. You can see Wilson and Company Slaughterhouse occupying 2 of those blocks, and then United Dressed Beef. So it was this was a huge area for abattoirs for slaughterhouses in New York City. And so the piers were also an important part of that because live animals would be brought in by water, and they would be slaughtered right here. And actually, there was an instance. I can't recall what year it was exactly. It may have been in. It was in the 1890s when actually a cow. It was 1883. A steer escaped from one of these slaughterhouses and made it all the way down, basically running rampant through the city, all the way down as far as 6th Street. And in 1895, another steer wound up roaming around the train yard in Grand Central Station. So this is something that still happens in certain neighborhoods, like here. And we had a steer actually escape back in 2017 and run around Prospect Park, and it happens in Jamaica, Ozone Park, neighborhoods where you still have a lot of live animal slaughter, but hard to imagine that happening now in Midtown East. But that was pretty common prior to basically the 1940s. Because these were all torn down for the construction of the UN. They were still operating into the 40s.
All right, now we're coming into the channel on the west side of Roosevelt Island, as we call it today, and we're approaching the Queensborough Bridge here with a lot of construction going on.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but yeah, I mean, you see a ton of crane barges and things along the east side of Manhattan, because the city is built up right to the water line, and actually beyond much beyond the water line. So much of this area is held up by piling, so construction has to be done from the water. And maybe we can take a look at Roosevelt Island on the other side.
Absolutely. Yeah, we kind of just passed the Four Freedoms Monument. You can just make out there. If we're looking into the sun, I'm not sure how much of that's going to come through, but coming
it
up,
looks okay.
Okay, yeah, good.
So we can see the Louis Kahn designed Four Freedoms Park at the southern tip of Roosevelt Island, which of course was formerly known as Blackwell's Island and then as Welfare Island. So this was really one of the first major sites of exclusion in New York City, typified by what's just north of the monument, which I'm not sure we can quite make out, but that is
not quite.
The former Renwick Hospital, which was a smallpox hospital. There were workhouses built on the island, as well as the city's jail was located here. So a place, undesirable people were for a long time placed on the island, including when we get to the north end of the island, we can see some remnants of the psychiatric hospital that was there as well. But this center section of the island has undergone major transformation. What used to be here was Goldwater Memorial Hospital, not named after Barry Goldwater. It was named after Dr. S.S. Goldwater, who ran the city's health and hospitals. And it was actually built specifically for, it was actually called the Welfare Hospital for Chronic Disease originally, built for treating polio patients. So it was designed for long-term care. That hospital was shut down, and the site was set aside for the New York City Tech Campus competition under the Bloomberg administration. And this is the fruits of that, which is the Cornell Tech Campus, which is a joint venture between the city, Cornell University, and Technion University in Israel. You can go and visit it. There is a hotel that they built, which is called the Graduate Hotel, and it has a rooftop bar, which I have yet to visit. I don't know when I'll have the strong desire to drink an $11 beer, but yeah.
And we've got the tram going across
there. Yeah, so Roosevelt Island, again, we've talked about it a lot on past programs, but it's a very quirky place, in part because it is part of New York City, but it's run by New York State, the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation, who redeveloped it starting in the 1960s into a model housing area. So kind of transforming it from its former use as a place for sort of exiling people in various ways into into a residential development. And so now
you can make out. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
Just noticing that we're passing that section of Whitewater I was talking about. I think we may have been more slowed for the barges, the construction barges, and the Whitewater, but that spot just north of the Queensborough Bridge is always a good reminder that the East River is a pretty fearsome piece of water and very fast moving.
Yeah, and that's actually part of the reason why it it took a long time to develop a lot of these islands, is that they were difficult to access because of the currents. People didn't want to live or have to regularly travel to places like Randalls Island and Ward's Island because it was so treacherous getting across the water.
A compliment to the Science Center we were just looking at a moment ago, as we come up here with the Hospital for Special Surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're approaching the Hellgate ahead of us here.
Yeah. I think we're just going to spot it right here. Marilyn just mentioned something. She said that there's still Goldwater Hospital on Roosevelt Island. That's actually, if I'm not mistaken, Kohler Specialty Hospital, which was sort of part of the same complex. So the older Goldwater complex to the south of the bridge is what was demolished. But there's still rehab and sort of long-term care facility that's on the north side. So yeah, you're right. There is still a hospital there. Yeah, if we could turn to the left a little bit, Stefan, and we can see this kind of low-rise area that's obscured by trees. This is also a really interesting spot. One we talked about almost a year ago now, when we did a program all about Rafael Guastavino, because this is a Guastavino project. We can't quite make it out, but I'm going to show some pictures that will better illustrate the buildings that we're talking about, which is now known as the Cherokee Apartments. And so the Cherokee Apartments were built in 1912 as not as a sort of state-run venture, but actually a private philanthropic one. They were funded by Vanderbilt. They were known as the East River Homes, and they were designed specifically to provide housing for poor people who had tuberculosis. And that's why it has these balconies on the outside. And the reason why we talked about it in the Guastavino program is because you maybe can make out that there's Guastavino tiles on the underside of these balconies. Now it's a very, very nice building, but built again as sort of as model housing in the early 20th century. Yeah. All right. I'm going to cut back to you.
Hallett's Cove and Blackwell's Island Light,
Yep.
which has seen some major restoration work happening there. There is no light on top of that lighthouse right now.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Huh. Yeah.
Luckily,
So
it's not the most important light in the harbor. So
right. Yeah. So again, like I said, we're coming up a different channel than we've come up before. But across the way is where, if we were on the Astoria route in Hallett's Cove, where we would dock, but we're going to come into East 90th Street and then make our way up into the teeth of the Hellgate in just a second. And yeah, you can really see the current kind of roiling here in between the Hellgate and the Harlem River coming in.
yeah, so there's the Harlem River and there's the Hellgate leading to Long Island Sound. And in between, we have Mill Rock, which used to be two rocks with, as we talked about on our tide mills program, that used to have a tide mill set in between those two rocks or over the top of them.
Yeah. And Stefan, you found a great map. I want to show first sort of a contemporary view while we're docking at East 90th Street of where we're going to go. And then we'll take a look at a historic map. So Stefan is sort of just right here on the far left side of the frame right now. And then we're going to come up through here. We're going to go underneath the Triboro Bridge and the Hellgate Bridge. And then as far as I know, this route actually will take us in between North Brother and South Brother Island and pretty close to Rikers Island right here, just past Hunts Point, and then over here to Soundview. So there's a lot to talk about in this section here, especially since we haven't gone up here before. But let's talk a little bit about the Hellgate in general. Now, Stefan, I was reading a little bit about the etymology of Hellgate, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, that's a twisty and uncertain territory.
Yeah,
that there. That's What did you learn?
So we'll share a little article that was written about it for the Gotham Center. But yeah, I mean, if you have navigated a boat through this area, especially before any improvements were made to the channel, it makes sense that you would call it the Hellgates, and in Dutch it's the Hellegat, because it's extremely treacherous. Ships would run aground and sink all the time in this area. So that sort of direct sort of cognate translation kind of makes sense. But there are other ideas that maybe that gat might mean something more like passageway or hole. And the name, as far as we know, was first coined in the early 17th century by Adrian Block coming through here. And Hellegat is not an uncommon name for waterways in the Netherlands. So, I mean, some people have even said that Hella might mean, it's a translation of, it means beautiful, but that's probably mistaken translation of it, that it probably does mean, treacherous in some way. But yeah, there's still question marks as to what the actual etymology of the term is.
And I do think it's awfully pretty, but yeah, it's pretty tricky to navigate, and it's still used heavily. You'll see a lot of barges go through here, and they can get quite a lot of speed up. You know, we have water. The tide rises out in the Atlantic, and part of it comes way down the Long Island Sound, and part of it comes a much shorter distance through the harbor. And the difference between those distances makes for a big difference in the height of the tide at any given moment here in the Hellgate, where those two waters meet. So we're doing some fancy dancing here, some serious navigation going on. We're kind of twisting and turning as we come through here, and that may have to do with the speed of the water as it balances the difference between the tide here at East River and in the Long Island Sound.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it, as we have this convergence, where these tides come together. In no way is the East River a river. Yeah, and so here on this map, we can see the various obstacles that you would have to navigate in addition to these swirling currents, some of which have been removed. So we mentioned Mill Rock before. Sort of other obstacles were blown up, and then the debris was piled on top of Mill Rock, which used to be two rocks. And then, yeah, and some of the other rocks we have here are Pot Rock. Is that right, Stefan?
That's correct. That's coming up ahead of us. That's just in front of the red bridge with the train crossing it ahead of us.
Okay. The other thing you can notice on this map right here is the large islands on the right, which we're passing by. You know, today we know them as Ward's Island and Randalls Island, but they're really one island. And in fact, it's made up of three islands. So we have Ward's Island, Randalls Island, and then we also have Sunken Meadow, which you can see over here, which over time in basically the latter half of the 20th century, this was all filled in to make the parkland that's there now. But yeah, let's take a look at the Triboro Bridge right here.
Now officially known as the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge.
Yep. And really the seat of power of another Robert Moses, who you know, was the head, one of the main sources of his power was the head of the Triboro Bridge and Tunnel Authority. And his office used to be just around the bend, sort of in the direction that you're looking right there, overlooking the Triboro Bridge Toll Plaza. And then, yeah, and then we're going to come up under the Hellgate Bridge. And apologies for the reception, but I do want to show another map that will illustrate why this is one of the most important bridges in New York City here. This beautiful steel arch span built in 1917. And both of these bridges, both the Triboro Bridge for vehicles and the Hellgate Bridge for trains, are extremely long. That really, you know, they span two bodies of water, but we think of them as sort of one contiguous bridge. So really, the Hellgate Bridge is so important because it transformed New York City's rail system, which was in large part sort of bifurcated in two pieces. One was the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad, which of course have their main stations at Penn Station and Grand Central, but they were not really connected in the same Northeast corridor. So if you wanted to go from Washington to Boston, say, you'd have to change trains from one carrier to another, and you'd have to physically travel the blocks in between Penn Station and Grand Central. What the Hellgate Bridge was, what it did was basically connect the lines running into New England to the Sunnyside Yard right here of the Pennsylvania Railroad. So you could come like this, and then go over the Hellgate Bridge and up like that, rather than having to sort of cross this break and then go up this way. So this was part of something called the New York Connecting Railroad, which still operates today. These sections down here operate, and we talk about them all the time because down right here at the southern terminus of it is the Brooklyn Army Terminal. So this is now, this section right here up to Fresh Pond and up to Sunnyside, this is all a freight line, whereas this section here is jointly used by freight and passenger trains. Did I miss anything, Stefan?
No, I think you got the bulk of it. We're now passing a wastewater treatment plant with 2 of our sludge boats lined up here. It's date back to the 1950s, and we can see there's a freight train going all down the Hellgate Bridge. The one thing you missed, you said there were 2 waterways the bridge crosses. When the bridge was built, it crossed 3 waterways.
That's right. Yeah.
Because these islands have been, as you noted earlier, joined together.
Yeah. So Ward and Randalls Island, have had a similar early history to Roosevelt Island in that, this was a location for a lot of, again, undesirable activities. And that's still the case to large measure in the city today. So, for example, there was a workhouse that was built on Randalls Island. It was the House of Refuge that was operated by the Society for the Reformation of Juvenile Delinquents in 1854. It was also used as an overflow for an overflow immigration station for Castle Garden down in Lower Manhattan. And today we have all sorts of activities of the city that take place there. So you mentioned the wastewater treatment plant. We also have the FDNY's training facility is located there, and also a training facility for is it Department of Sanitation or DEP? I can never remember.
I think it's DEP, but we'll have to double check.
Yeah, it's DEP. Yeah. Which also there's a famous scene like at that facility that's in the movie The French Connection. Oh
yes.
And then it also has a very large homeless shelter and a large public psychiatric hospital is there as well. But then it also has huge amounts of parkland, playing fields for kids. We have the stadium that's there as well, now called Icon Stadium. But yeah, so now we're basically heading into Long Island Sound. Is that right, Stefan?
Yes, correct.
I think we have a better view, so I will take my spotlight off.
Right, here's North Brother Island.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which is South Brother's on the other side, but South Brother has sort of the less remarkable history. It's had buildings for less of its history. North Brother is famous as the home of Typhoid Mary when she was quarantined here. And of course, is most famous perhaps in New York maritime history as the end of the line for the General Slocum, the steamship, that tragedy of the first decade of the 20th century.
Tragedy and a crime.
Indeed.
We should add, yeah. So I'm sure people, if you know New York City history, you know at least a little bit about the General Slocum disaster, but it was June 15th, 1904. They departed from the East Village, I think it was East 6th Street or East 3rd Street, heading up to a beach in Long Island when the steamship caught fire, and they did not have the proper safety equipment, including life jackets, which actually were made by an unscrupulous supplier who had filled them with iron bars and loose, dusty cork, and they had sat out on the deck of the ship since it was built in 1891 and just rotted away in the sun. So most people who jumped into the water with a life jacket, that was worse than having none on at all. So over 1,000 people were killed, and was hugely devastating, especially to the German-speaking community in New York City. And I know
of course, all those people were they were looking for a break from the city, and that's a lot of what defines what we're going to see here. Is a lot of the communities we're going to pass into are places that in the early 20th century were a place people could get away from the city and relax. Dead ahead of us, we can see the floating pool called the Floating Pool Lady, which also was kind of a throwback, built about 30 years ago to 20, 30 years ago to provide relief for people who didn't have access to pools. I believe it was down in Brooklyn Bridge Park for a while, and it's been up here for quite a while since.
Yeah, built I think about 30 years ago, but actually didn't open until 2007. So it took a long time to get the city to approve it, but here you can see a picture of it up there. in the Bronx. But it was, yeah, started by the floating pool lady named Ann Buttenweiser. And she did one of your New York City history in 10 boats.
She did. Delightful
Right?
lady. Her personal story is great. You'll get into a little bit of that if you read that article on WaterWire.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll share that with everyone. Now there's a very different floating barge that's right in front of us right now.
Yeah, this is the Vernon C Bane. This is a floating prison. Of course, we have a huge history of floating prisons in New York, going back to the Revolution and over in Wallabout Bay with the prison ships. But we returned to floating prisons in New York in the 90s with prison overcrowding. Initially, we're using a couple of old British troop ships, and then a couple of the last steam-powered Staten Island ferries, and then we specially built this one to replace those just as it came online in the early aughts, just as our prison system was starting to, the overcrowding was starting to be less of a problem. But they've maintained it here on Hunts Point, and there's no sign of going away anytime soon.
And of course, directly behind you is the main prison complex, which is Rikers Island.
That's right. But with the sun, it's going to be a little hard to see.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but you can't talk about, if we're going to be talking about places of exclusion on our island, Rikers Island is the prime example of that. But I wanted to talk about what's directly in front of us here, which is one of the most important little pieces of land in New York City, which is Hunts Point. And I'll pull up a map here so folks can get a sense of the scale of Hunts Point and what it's used for, which is the city's real food distribution hub. And so, the three main parts of it are the produce market, you can see here on the north part, the meat market in the center, and then of course the famous Fulton Fish Market down at the bottom. And as Stefan mentioned to me earlier today, that we actually started the tour right in the shadow of the old Fulton Fish Market. We're going to end it right next to the new Fulton Fish Market. And so this complex, sort of the modern complex, was built in the 1960s. And the Fulton Fish Market actually wasn't moved until 2005. But, this all started to have this sort of concentration of food processing and distribution in the 1930s under Mayor LaGuardia. And so in addition to these different distribution centers, you also have lots of manufacturers. And you can also see on this map, you have private distributors that are here as well. So it's part of a larger food industrial complex that's there. And just to give you a sense of the scale of Hunts Point Market, so about 4.5 billion pounds of food are shipped through here every year, and fully half of it is consumed in New York City, including 12% of all the food consumed in New York City, 25% of the produce, 35% of the meat, and 45% of the fish all comes through here. And another connection to the beginning of the tour to the end of the tour has to do with resiliency. We're thinking very, very hard about making Lower Manhattan more resilient in ways that are some controversial. And they're starting to think about that, but there really aren't any solid plans. And this is also one of the most heavily flood-prone areas in New York City here, right at the mouth of the Bronx River.
That's right. This whole area, I may be breaking up a little there, but this whole area is former salt marshes, and you can see how low the land is, how close the buildings are to the water. This is an extraordinarily high-risk area, and one that certainly deserves as much attention as anywhere else. It's also the end of the line. We can see our terminal coming up here.
Yep. So we just passed the mouth of the Bronx River, and so we're here in Soundview, and Soundview is also, we're sort of between two rivers, right? So we passed the Bronx River, and then it's Westchester Creek that is right in front of us. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And there we can see the Whitestone Bridge just peeking out there in the distance. As we come by here, we've talked a lot about the different industry and city infrastructure that's located along this stretch of the waterfront. But it's also important to mention, some of the natural areas that are here as well. And I think it's appropriate to end at the Bronx River, which is really the longest freshwater waterway and the only true kind of river that's left in New York City. So we want to give a shout out to our friends at Rockin' the Boat, which takes kids out in the Bronx River, and also the Bronx River Alliance, which I'll share one last image, which has helped to create the Bronx River Greenway. So really what you're seeing here at the mouth of the Bronx River, runs through so many important green spaces in the Bronx, including, the Bronx Zoo and Van Cortlandt Park. And you can see that illustrated here. So something to check out.
I'm still
Awesome.
here. I just, since we're at the end of the line here, I figured I'd start heading out of here.
All right. Awesome.
But it was a real pleasure sharing the East River with you.
Yeah, it was great. Again, folks, just apologies that we had a little bit of connectivity issues coming through the Hellgate there, but it's an area of turbulence. So why would we be surprised that we don't have great reception through there? But I wanted to thank everybody so much for joining us today. Like I said, we'll share a lot of these resources that we have talked about on the program today. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on Friday.